how cool is that I get like a theme song, right? I think that's really dope. So the song was Shining by DJ Khaled, Beyonce, Jay-Z. And I play this song every morning as like inspiration. It's about winning and shining. And one of the lines in there is, don't slow me down. And I thought it was perfect for this talk because if you don't have automation in your definition of done, you are being slowed down. And I want to help you to get back on track, okay? So again, I'm Angie Jones. I'm a consultant automation engineer at LexisNexis. I help a lot of teams there, provide automation strategy for them, build frameworks, that sort of thing, okay? Correction on my Twitter handle is TechGirl1908. And I also blog about automation strategies and techniques at angiejones.tech, okay? So today what I want to talk about is in-sprint automation, or how do you get automation included in your definition of done. Let's just see who I have in the room. How many automation engineers are here? All right, okay. Testers who are not doing automation themselves? Okay. Managers? A lot of managers. I always get a lot of managers for this talk. Scrum masters? Developers? Anyone I missed? Okay, great. So, talking about the definition of done, let's just make sure that we're all on the same page. It says a set of criteria that the team agrees must be completed before a feature can be considered done, okay? A couple of things about this jumps out at me, one being team. So this is very much so a team decision. Like I said, I consult with a lot of teams, and I already know that they should have automation included in their definition of done. And so I go in and I'm kind of bossy, and I'm like, get this done. That doesn't work. So what I'm learning is that it's very much so a team decision. The team has to have buy-in, and they have to believe that they can do it, okay? The other thing that jumps out is before a feature can be considered done. This is probably the biggest challenge with getting automation included in your definition of done. People don't think that it can be. If you look at automation, it is software development, right? So we're developing features, and we're trying to develop automation, and we're trying to test it all within the sprint, maybe 2 weeks. People don't see this as something that is feasible, but it is. So I'm going to share some techniques today to help you understand how you might be able to accomplish this in your environment. So here's an example of a definition of done, typical one that I see. Acceptance tests are identified, the code is committed, unit tests are passing, the code has been peer reviewed, acceptance tests are passing, and the feature is documented. What's missing? Automation, of course, right? So I ask the team a question a lot of times. Without that in there, are we really done? According to the definition that we agreed upon as a team, yes, we are done. However, we're leaving the sprint with a lot of baggage, right? So we have a lot of technical debt that we're leaving with. And that's not what we want to do. Every single sprint, we are developing features. We have testers who are testing them. They might do a wonderful job at doing that, but then we don't automate, and we put it on a backlog, and we move on until the next sprint. And then in the next sprint, what are we doing? The same thing. And a lot of times, these sprints are kind of related, right? She's nodding her head like, yep, yep. So the sprints are kind of related. The next feature might build upon the last feature that we touch. And yet there's no regression testing being that's going on right there. So you're missing out on some things. You have this technical debt that you need to address at some point, right? And that's every single sprint. So I really strongly advise against that. What we see, how people are handling this now, and raise your hand if I'm telling the truth, we leave the sprint, we put the automation test or the test on a backlog, and we have some poor automation engineer working in a silo, and they're pretty much automating this stuff. If that's your life, raise your hand. Yep. Yeah, so there's some challenges with this. One is that they're not involved in the agile ritual, so they don't really know or have the context about what's going on when that feature is being developed. So they're blindly coding to this test case document, right? That's probably not the best anyway, because we kind of just rushed and wrote some things down, and it didn't really tell everything that we were testing. And so that's not really a good place to be in. So before you can even think about doing your in-sprint automation, I strongly advise that as a prereq, you go ahead and embed your automation engineers into your Agile Scrum teams, okay? The reason you want to do this, you want them to hear what's going on. You want to be able to get their feedback, let them hear about the challenges, about what we're building, what we're addressing, which parts of the code are not as stable as we like, right? So those kind of things usually come up in stand-ups. You hear testers talk about bugs that they open. You hear developers say, oh man, I don't want to take that feature because that part of the application is so flaky, right? And so you want the automation person to hear this information too so that they can do a thorough job of automating. So that was a prereq, right? That's not going to get you in sprint automation. A lot of people think taking that one step is going to magically give them this in-sprint automation, and it's not. That's just the prereq. And the solution that I'm going to give you is not like a bulletproof solution that you can use in any case, right? So the way I provide strategy is very contextual. I go to the different teams and I look at their culture, I look at their team makeup, who do they have on the team, the skill set and all of that, and that's how I come up with the customized strategy for them. But what I have done today is took like 3 techniques that I see myself applying over and over again to the different teams, okay? So this is not the full solution, but these techniques should help you in your strategy. The 3 techniques. 1, collaborate with other players. So now that we have the automation engineers embedded on these teams, what does that look like? How should they interact with the other members of the team? How can the other members of the team, the ones of you who are not automation engineers, how can you help get this goal accomplished? Because remember, this is a team thing. 2, automate strategically. So again, like I said before, the teams don't think that this is possible because we're doing software development on both testing and production, right? So we need to be strategic about how do we get this done. So I'll share some techniques on how you can do that. And finally, to build incrementally. So don't try to build your entire framework in a sprint, right? Let's do what we can and be smart about it and use some of the same agile techniques that our developers are using with automation development. So going through each one of these. Number 1, collaborate with other players. So the first person you want to talk to is your business folks. Your product owners, your business analysts. The reason for this is because they have a lot of information about the application, what we're building, why we're building it, and who's using it, customer pain points. I am not shy about going to the business people and asking for analytics about the application. So if we're updating a feature, I want to know how's that feature being used now. So that gives me a lot of insight. The reason I want this is because I cannot automate every single test. I don't think that that's wise to do for a lot of different reasons. One reason being the more that we automate, the more that we have to maintain, right? And when you look at why are you automating, ask yourself, do I really need everything automated, every single test? Now, I might want to test everything, but do I really want to hear this feedback? And that's what automation pretty much is feedback. Do I want to hear this feedback every time a developer checks in code, right? If it's part of continuous integration. Or if we need to run our automation suite as part of a regression run, do I really want this run to take several hours with a lot of very low value tests? No, I don't. So I look at the information that I get from the business and make decisions about what should be automated. What is the most valuable tests that we have. Which ones are more likely to cause pain points for our customers or risky areas, things like that, okay? The second group you want to talk to is your testers. So I hate when I go into environments and the automation engineers and the testers are not working together. And yes, I think of these as two separate roles. One, because the automation engineers and the testers cannot do everything in a sprint. So managers, I saw a lot of managers in the room. I know a lot of you are trying to get both of these done out of the same person. There's an opportunity cost there. I often tell managers, let's sit and think about this. Your developers are writing code for a feature, right? Your automation engineer then has to write code to test that feature. If you really think about that, your automation engineers are writing more code than your developers are, because there are more tests involved than just that feature, the code that was for that feature. So you're not asking your developers to go out there and do the testing. Why would you expect your automation engineer to be able to split that time to do a thorough job at testing and write the code for automation? It's not feasible. I've not seen it work successfully. Usually there's an opportunity cost there. They're going to pick one or the other. Most times, good employees will pick the regular testing because they want to make sure that we're not sacrificing quality. Now, there are some who are more interested in the coding aspect, so they'll choose that. But you're not really going to get both, especially not all the time, especially not for in-sprint automation, okay? So with your testers, what you want to do is get some information from them about what tests that they plan to run. So given this feature, it says, as a user, I want to search the catalog so that I can find specific products, and then here's a whole bunch of tests here. Given that, talk with the testers. Have your testers and your automation engineers talk about, okay, which one of these do we want to do further exploratory testing on, and which one of these should be automated? Not all of them may be automated. I say that, so in some cases, maybe they do all need to be automated. Is there anybody here who thinks all of these should be automated? No? Good, okay. So, yeah, it's a discussion. And in some cases, these might be like your most valuable tests, and they do all need to be automated. It depends, it's contextual. So definitely have your automation engineers and your testers communicate and work together. All right? The other person you want to have your automation engineers talk with are your developers. So we're trying to do in-sprint automation. We've already said that this is software development from both the developers and the automation engineers. So what I suggest people do is set up a meeting. Have the automation engineer and the developer go into a room, right? And the automation engineer brings a sheet of paper for herself and one for the developer and a pencil, okay? Don't cheat, don't look at each other's papers. Go ahead and take the textual description of the feature and draw out what you think that looks like. This is, granted, you don't have a UI person. If you have a UI person, you can skip this whole step. But for the teams that don't, draw out what you think this looks like. You'll be surprised how different we interpret these based on our roles. So testers, they're looking at this much differently. They're looking at this from the customer's perspective. You might hear things like, oh, I drew mine this way because this feature resembles this other feature that we have in the application, and for consistency's sake, I thought it should look like that one, right? You might hear the developer say things like, oh, well, mine looks like this because I'm going to use this fancy JavaScript widget, and this is how it comes out. So and there's a conversation between you. If you already know, as an automation engineer, what this UI is going to look like, then that's so helpful in going and developing in parallel with your developers. So you don't want to wait until the developers finish. What if they don't finish until the end of the sprint? And then you're stuck. Remember, you have to write more code than them. And you're stuck in the last few days trying to crank out all of these automation tests. They're going to be flaky. They're not going to be reliable. That's not what we want, okay? Now, this is fine. You can take this stuff and you can actually go and start automating. Now, you can even take it a step further if you want to and have a contract with the developer. So with that, you can begin identifying what the elements are and what the IDs should be. So I can say for a given test that I need to automate, I need this element, that element, and this one. Let's go ahead and put IDs on these now. I think the ID should be search bar, and it should be product with a unique identifier or whatever. Go ahead and start identifying that. If I have this information, I can go back to my desk, write the code in parallel without any code from development, and I already have my entire test and framework built out for it. When the developer does deliver the code, I just hit run. It's already done, okay? Now, some people say, well, this part of it with the IDs and everything, I can't get my developers to commit to this kind of thing. If you can, it's great, because what I've learned is trying to get them to remember to put them in themselves doesn't work very well. They always forget because they're heads down and coding a feature. However, when I do this exercise with them, it reinforces it. It lets them know what I need as an automation engineer. And so it's more kind of ingrained in them, and they'll typically go ahead and do it. If they don't do it, you're still good with this part. You can just put little dummy IDs or blank strings or whatever you need to do. And then once they do deliver it, you just fill in that part. Okay? All right. The second technique is to automate strategically. So how many people here are familiar with Mike Cohn's automation pyramid? Raise of hands. Okay. So I'll go over it. There are 3 layers here. What Mike Cohn suggests is that our testing should resemble this, the number of tests we have. So the largest layer at the bottom is the unit test layer. And what he recommends is that most of your tests fall in this layer of the pyramid. They should be unit tests. The next largest layer, services. So that's where the next biggest chunk of your tests should reside. And then you should have very few UI tests. Now, in theory, pretty much everyone agrees with this. However, in practice, that's a much different story, right? So if you're being delivered UI features from the developer, of course you're going to want to test it on the UI. We say, oh, well, it's a UI feature. I guess I need to test it there. And so it's hard to put this in practice. The way that I'm able to do this is not box myself into any of these layers. So what I do is very strategic in saying that a test case can blend across multiple of these layers. And let me show you some examples of what I mean. So feature 1, search catalog. As a user, I want to search the catalog so that I can find specific products, okay? Now, originally I would think that, yep, this is a UI feature. I need to search the application. I need to go to the search widget, and I need to search. Of course, this is UI. However, it doesn't have to all be on the UI. I do agree that you do need to test the UI. You do, especially if you have all of these features like sorting and filtering and things like that. You want to touch the UI. However, does every single test that you're going to automate need to live at the UI, especially when you're exercising the same code path? So how about you add a few tests, the ones that are exercising different code paths, do that at the UI. And then for the ones that you're just basically testing like different string patterns and things like that, how about we put that at the unit test layer? So you can split things out like that, okay? As an automation engineer, I think your developer might welcome you committing to their unit test, or you can ask them to do it, okay? Feature 2, add to a cart. As a user, I want to view the details page of a product and add the product to my cart, okay? Now, if I think about the steps of this, I need to first launch the application. I need to search for the product. I need to find the product in the results. I need to click on the product. I need to then click the button to add the product to the cart, okay? All of that done on the UI, in my opinion, is too much. What am I really testing here? Let's get to the heart of what are you testing? It says that I want to test that I can add the product to the cart. So all that searching and stuff like that, that's irrelevant to the test. So why do the entire test at the UI layer? Especially because last sprint, I had the feature 1, where I already test searching. So why do I want to do it again here? And a lot of you would say, well, I already have the code for it, why not reuse it? Here's the problem. Let's say search on the UI breaks, right? So you're going to have the test from last sprint, they're going to fail, and this test is going to fail too. Why would I want this test to fail? This is testing adding to a cart. Because search is broken, now I can't test adding to a cart? That's not what I want, right? The other thing is that it becomes flaky. It takes longer to run. If you're using your automation as part of a continuous integration process, you want your test to be as fast as possible because you want fast feedback for your developers. So the way I get around this is to use a little bit of UI, but I cheat. So look for shortcuts and things like that in your application. When you click on a product, does the URL change? Is it unique? Can I get to that product just by launching that URL and skip all of the searching steps? Yes, if that URL is unique, you can. So that's a quick way to be able to get right to the heart of the matter. What are we testing? Test that part at the UI if you feel you need to, but take some shortcuts, okay? Last feature, remove from cart. As a user, I want to remove an item from my cart. Again, let's look at the steps for this scenario. So I would search for the product, find the product in the results, click on the product, click the add to cart, go to the cart, and then finally I'm able to test the removal of that item. Again, why do I want to do all of that on the UI? Look for ways in your application that you may be able to use things like web services. So adding to a cart, if there's a button there, then 9 times out of 10, you can craft your own web service. Now, it might not even be a public-facing web service that your company promotes as part of the product, but it's there. And I have a blog post on this that you can go and see the details of how you might go about crafting that by looking at the HTML and things like that. But the simple way is just ask your developers, hey, do we have a web service that will allow me to add a product to the cart? Oh yeah, here it is. Great, thanks. Run that web service, that adds the product to the cart. Your only UI steps are to go to the cart. If the cart has a special URL, we don't need to navigate through a lot of things. Just go right to that cart URL and begin your test right there, removing the item, okay? So this will speed your tests up and make them less brittle. The third technique, build incrementally. So Rome was not built in a day, and neither does your automation framework need to be. I see a lot of times where a new page is developed, right? And people focus on developing their page object model or whatever for this entire page. Yet, they're only testing using a few of these elements. So why would you go and build the entire framework? Well, I'm thinking your idea is, well, I go ahead and invest that now, and then whenever I do have tests for those other elements, it'll be there. Remember, we're in a sprint. We don't have a lot of time on our hands. So if you can cut that out, cut that out. Why build things that you're not going to use? The other thing is, what happens if those elements change? You don't have any code that exercises that. So it could change from right up under you, and you wouldn't know. And then when you go to use it, it's not working, and you can't figure out why. Is this a bug in the application, or did I code it wrong, or whatever? So I just stay away from adding things to my framework that I'm not going to use. Saves me time. I can move a lot quicker. Okay? The other thing I do is use a TDD approach. So TDD is test-driven development, and it basically means to write your test first, and then just write as much code as you need to make those tests pass. So I use that with automation. I write my test. This is my test, searching for a discounted product. And notice the red lines. So those red lines are methods that have not been created in my framework yet. So in writing my test, I know I want to have a method called this, a method that does this, a method that does that. All right? And then I just go and build the framework for that. Also, sometimes we have features that are developed and they tell us that these are not testable yet, right? So how many people have had this happen where, yep. So they're developing a little bit because, you know, we have a short amount of time and we want to get done what we can. So in this example, it's a form. And in that sprint, they built out the form, but the button doesn't do anything yet. This is just the first feature, to build out the form. So they said, well, don't worry because this is not testable yet. You can test it next sprint when we develop the code that makes this button work. Well, as an automation engineer, if I wait until the next sprint, then I need to build all of the framework in the test for this page and all of the framework in the test for the next page that the button takes me to within those 2 weeks. That's not what I want. I'm going to become very frustrated and stressed. So what I do is go ahead and figure out what tests I am going to do. And then I write the framework in the test for that, even if they're not executable right now. So I can go ahead and put them in progress or something like that, but I know what I want to do when it's available, and so I'll go ahead and add that in that sprint, and then in the next sprint, I can just focus on what's new, okay? So given those 3 techniques, hopefully your definition of done will look something like this, where the scenarios are automated. Now, I don't recommend getting like very specific with this. A lot of managers, I know that you all love numbers and metrics and things like that, and you want to say something silly like 90% of our tests will be automated. Don't do that. What you want to do is just leave it generic so that your team is able to make wise decisions. They can decide, based on what I said, about talking with the business, about talking with the testers, they can make those decisions about what should be automated. Trust that they will do this without you putting a hard number there. What you don't want them to do is start automating things just for the sake of making you happy with the metric, okay? So, recap on the 3 strategies. Collaborate with the other players. So your automation engineer, you want them to talk to the business. You want them to talk to the testers. You want them to talk to the developers, right? So all of those folks can play a role in helping to get automation included in the definition of done. You want to automate strategically, okay? So again, don't try to do everything at the UI layer if you don't have to. Don't repeat the same steps that are irrelevant to the test. Find shortcuts in your application. Find ways to use web services and direct URLs. And then finally, build incrementally. So you want to use the TDD approach if you can. And don't try to build framework that you don't need because you'll have to maintain that framework. All right? So what questions do you all have? You have some for me, Ryan?
I have questions here, but then we'll get to you guys in a minute. We have some questions on the PolEV app, which is available for tomorrow as well, so make sure you guys are continually using that. But Angie, we had some really good questions come in. One of the questions we had was, how do you measure the effectiveness of the automation?
How do I measure the effectiveness, right? Okay, so if a test, I'm looking at basically the feedback that the tests provide to whoever may be running them. So that could be your testers during regression cycle. If it's part of continuous integration, your customer is your developer. So what feedback are you getting? Is it reliable? Is it a whole bunch of noise? Like I have all of these tests running and I don't even care about that? Or I have a lot of tests breaking for one thing, like when I broke search and then I had 200 tests fail. Do I need 200 tests to tell me that search broke? Or would one test have sufficed? So that's how I measure it.
All right, awesome. Question on the 3 strategies you had. What is really, if you kind of look at those strategies, and you've been consulting for a long time now, and you kind of see teams go from different stages in those strategies, right? Where's the bottleneck? What stage is the worst that you see that could go wrong? And what usually goes wrong?
Probably between 1 and 2. So 1 in figuring out what to automate. So a lot of times I'll see the automation engineers and they end up trying to automate every test. And so that holds them up. Also the whole strategic part. So again, if you're trying to do like all of this UI automation, that's going to take a long time. So between those 2 things, that's where I see automation engineers kind of spending a lot of time that they don't necessarily need to.
Okay, we got a question from the crowd here.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you. It was really informative.
Thank you.
So I basically work for a startup, and we have a lot of software built already, and now we are starting to build a lot of automation over it. Obviously, they didn't do a lot before, so I just joined in, and I have to write a lot of automation for them. So on a follow-up question on the first question, like how do you actually evaluate like how much success we are doing? Because obviously bugs are always going to be there, feedbacks are always going to be there. I don't think that is a huge, like even if you're getting like 100 feedbacks, maybe 10 of them are positive and 90 of them is negative, then you're doing something wrong. But sometimes it's very difficult to actually evaluate how much code coverage you have. So like writing a lot of unit tests or taking care of all the scenarios, what would be the best approach towards it to increase the quality of your product? Thank you.
You might want to ask somebody else. So I don't care about like code coverage type things. When people ask me for stuff like that, I don't focus on that. People may have different opinions in the room. I'm going to leave that to them. As far as measuring quality, I think of automation, test automation, and I don't get into like the whole vocabulary debate and all of that, but it is kind of like a sanity check. And so these are things that we've already tested, and so we're just running them as part of a regression. So I don't look to automation to discover like new bugs and things like that. They're there to let us know if there's a regression. So if you're focusing on test automation to be able to provide you information about the overall quality of your application, I don't think that that's the right approach.
Okay, other question from the crowd?
It was good, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we include our, we have a lot of situations where our UI and our, UI is in flux, right? So we start from the API and we include it in our definition of done.
Nice.
With the API. But in a situation, I just wanted to ask, like, from your process and your method right here, you're talking about when the UI is pretty stable, right? You've done the design work and it's in a pretty stable position, right, to start. Because, we do the skeleton, what you want to call it, first or whatever, but we don't go in and actually do the automating the screener, because sometimes it's in flux. That's where you're at, right, when it's stable? That's what I'm asking.
Can't say that the UI is stable because I don't even have a UI when I start.
Okay.
So the whole exercise of saying, hey, put your tester, your automation, and your developer in a room, and let's go ahead and stabilize the design of this thing before your developers even begin, helps a whole lot. So that helps them. It's not just for the automation person. It helps the developer also flesh out their ideas and figure out how they're going to approach this. And so given that, they leave with a template, and so it shouldn't be in flux anymore. And if it is, then we've had this conversation. You know that I was relying on that information and that I'm coding to that. So this helps them to remember, if I'm going to change something in that contract that we agreed to, I'm going to go back to the automation engineer and let them know that.
In the automation pyramid, everybody shows unit test on the bottom. Do you believe the unit test is done by the automation engineer or the developer?
I believe that is done by the developer. However, I was talking with a team the other day, and we decided, so the automation engineers, they were struggling. They were getting the in-sprint automation done, But what they weren't able to do is pay attention to some of these bills that were running. And so the bills were getting in like a red state, and the whole maintenance aspect of it was being ignored. So in discussing this, what we decided to do is to push a lot of what they're doing as far as automating down to the unit test layer. And what that means is that development would need to pick up some of those. And so the automation engineer asked the question like, well, they're not going to want to do that. If I look at what they're going to automate it from the unit test layer, and I say, oh, I don't think that's enough coverage, you should also add these, then they're going to beat me up. And so my response to that is, why do you need them to do it? You can ask them to do it, but if they don't, is it just not going to get done? Are you going to argue back and forth? Or can you just do that as the automation engineer, add additional scenarios to the unit test? What's wrong with that?
What are your thoughts on test data? So specifically, do you
Oh my
prefer
God,
to
it's a
use
nightmare.
like live customer data, or a data set that you know is going to be stable for your automated tests, or do you try to write your tests to be like data agnostic?
It really depends on the application. So this varies in every application that I work on, and so there's no like hard, fast rule, and we have industry leaders who are looking at this and trying to figure out how to do this. Everybody's stumped about it, just because there's no rule that you can apply to all these different applications. Paul Merrill, who's a good friend of mine, he actually has a blog post on this and a talk on this, and he talks about 4 different test data management strategies. So given those 4, typically I find myself in one of those boats. So if you want to look that up and see if one of those 4 may be applicable. You're welcome.
Okay, last question.
So
His name is Paul Merrill. He's one of the speakers here, Merrill.
So I love the fact that you mentioned about collaboration between the manual testers and automation. So one of the things that we do in our company is bugs that are found by manual testers can be flagged as need automation, right? So later on in the process, we can go back and revisit and automate them. Do you have any other suggestions or ideas of collaboration between manual testers and automate engineers?
Yeah, I think testers can, one, provide that information. So I think that's wonderful that not just at the feature level, but as they're finding important critical bugs, that they feed that back to the automation engineer so they can beef up those tests and kind of add more coverage around those areas. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Also, so I'm not one who tries to push everybody into automation. I don't think that that's the right approach. I think that we definitely need people who are focused on testing. And those testers can, however, do other things within the automation cycle. It doesn't have to be coding. We don't need them to just be coding. So maybe triaging the bills and things like that and finding information there, because that information can be helpful to them as testers as well. So right now we only use it to say what failed, what didn't. But if we were collecting like metrics, this test is always failing, and it's not because, not always, but like, you know, it's failing sometimes. It fails a lot, basically. And it's not because of anything with the automation code. It's really the application, right? So as a tester, I would want to know that information. Like, this is a fragile area of the application that I may need to do some more exploration on. Okay? I think I'm out of time.
Yeah, you're out of time.
Okay.
Just get off the stage quickly for somebody to ask you another question.
I'll be around the entire conference, so if you have any other questions or you want to chit-chat, then come and find me with the bright yellow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie.
All righty.